Ben Carson sat in the Fox News town hall audience section, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. The 73-year-old retired neurosurgeon and former HUD Secretary preparing to question a congresswoman he had characterized in previous media appearances as representing the inexperienced radical left that was destroying American cities through policies disconnected from the realities facing working families. The celebrated pediatric neurosurgeon turned conservative political figure who had built his post-medical career on soft-spoken criticism of progressive policies while promoting bootstrap individualism based on his own remarkable rise from poverty to medical prominence had apparently decided that this public forum would provide an opportunity to contrast his decades of professional accomplishment and government service with what he viewed as Crockett's limited experience and radical ideology. What transpired over the next 13 minutes would expose how completely Carson had misjudged both his opponent's actual qualifications and the audience's receptiveness to his condescending approach, and would reveal how catastrophically he had miscalculated in attempting to diminish someone whose response would systematically demonstrate that his own HUD tenure had been characterized by scandal, incompetence, and policy failures that contradicted every claim he made about understanding how to help struggling communities. Jasmine Crockett had walked into this town hall knowing that Carson might attempt to question her credentials given his pattern of dismissing younger progressive politicians as unqualified, and she had prepared a comprehensive response that would use his own disastrous record as HUD Secretary to prove that experience in government was meaningless if that experience consisted of mismanagement, corruption, and implementing policies that made housing less affordable and less accessible for the very communities he claimed to serve. When Carson opened by suggesting in his characteristically gentle tone that Crockett's brief time in Congress and lack of executive experience raised questions about whether she understood the complexities of actually implementing policy rather than just giving speeches, her response citing the Inspector General reports documenting his lavish office spending, his son's illegal involvement in HUD events, his failure to spend appropriated funds, and his complete inability to articulate coherent housing policy would turn the audience so decisively against him that the moderator would have to intervene to prevent the hostile reaction from derailing the entire event. Before we show you exactly how Congresswoman Crockett used Carson's own tenure as case study in how credentials without competence produced catastrophic results, and how her systematic recitation of his failures would leave the audience audibly gasping and murmuring in disbelief that he had dared to question anyone else's qualifications, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss these extraordinary moments when preparation and actual knowledge of someone's record completely destroy their attempt to claim superior experience. The Fox News Town Hall had been organized as part of the network's series examining urban policy and economic opportunity in American cities. The format brought together political figures, policy experts, and community advocates to discuss challenges facing urban communities and to debate competing approaches to addressing poverty, housing affordability, crime, and economic development. Carson had been invited given his tenure as HUD Secretary and his long-standing conservative commentary on urban policy, while Crockett had been included as a congressional representative whose district included significant urban constituencies and whose legislative work focused on housing, economic justice, and civil rights issues. The town hall had proceeded through its first hour with various speakers presenting their perspectives on urban challenges and policy solutions. Carson had spoken during an earlier segment about the importance of economic opportunity, personal responsibility, and reducing government dependency, articulating his standard conservative framework that emphasized individual initiative over structural reform. His delivery had been characteristically soft-spoken, and his personal story of rising from poverty in Detroit to become renowned neurosurgeon had lent emotional weight to his arguments about what was possible through hard work and determination. When the audience question period arrived, Carson had been recognized and had asked to direct a question to Congresswoman Crockett. He began by noting respectfully that he appreciated her passion for helping her constituents, but that he was concerned about whether someone with her limited experience understood the complexities of actually managing large government programs and implementing policies at scale. He observed that he had spent decades as a surgeon making life and death decisions, had run a major hospital department, and had then served as HUD Secretary, overseeing billions in funding and thousands of employees, and that this executive experience had taught him how difficult it was to translate good intentions into effective programs. Carson suggested with apparent concern rather than hostility that Crockett's background as an attorney and her brief time in Congress had not provided comparable experience with the practical challenges of governance, and he asked whether she worried that her policy proposals might reflect idealism disconnected from the realities of implementation. The question was framed as constructive concern from an elder statesman rather than as attack, but its substance was clear attempt to position her as inexperienced and naive compared to his accumulated expertise. Crockett thanked Dr. Carson for his question and noted that she wanted to address it directly because she believed the question of what constituted relevant experience and how to evaluate someone's record was indeed important. She stated that she agreed completely that credentials and titles were meaningless if they did not translate into competent performance and positive results, and that examining actual records was essential for determining whether experience had produced expertise or had simply demonstrated incompetence at higher levels of responsibility. She proceeded to note that since Carson had raised his HUD tenure as evidence of his executive experience and his understanding of housing policy, she wanted to examine what that tenure had actually accomplished and what it revealed about whether his experience qualified him to question others' capabilities. She stated that she had reviewed the public record of his time at HUD, including Inspector General reports, congressional oversight findings, and independent policy analyses, and that what she had found raised serious questions about whether his tenure represented the kind of experience that should be held up as model of effective governance. Crockett began by addressing the issue that had generated the most public attention during Carson's HUD tenure, his decision to spend $31,000 of taxpayer money on a custom dining room set for his office. She noted that this expenditure had violated federal spending limits, that it had occurred despite career staff warning that it was illegal, and that Carson had initially claimed his wife had made the purchase without his knowledge before emails revealed he had been directly involved. She observed that someone with sound judgment and respect for taxpayer resources would not have approved luxury furniture purchases that violated law, and that his willingness to blame his wife when caught suggested character issues beyond just poor spending decisions. She continued by addressing the Inspector General's findings that Carson's son, Ben Carson Jr., and his business associates had been improperly involved in HUD events, including a listening tour that appeared designed to promote the younger Carson's business interests. She noted that federal ethics rules prohibited officials from using their positions to benefit family members, that career ethics officials had warned Carson about these violations, and that he had proceeded anyway, suggesting either ignorance of basic ethics requirements or deliberate disregard for them. The Congresswoman proceeded to address Carson's failure to spend billions of dollars that Congress had appropriated for housing programs, noting that at the end of fiscal year 2018, HUD had left more than $4 billion unspent despite urgent housing needs. She observed that this failure meant that families who could have been helped with rental assistance or housing repairs went without aid because Carson's department could not or would not implement programs that Congress had funded. She stated that inability to spend money Congress had appropriated for specific purposes was not evidence of fiscal responsibility, but rather was evidence of administrative incompetence. Crockett then addressed Carson's policy performance by noting that during his tenure, housing affordability had worsened, homelessness had increased, and his signature initiative, called Envision Centers, had been widely criticized as poorly planned publicity stunt that accomplished little. She cited analysis showing that the Envision Centers had provided minimal services at significant cost, and that career HUD staff had raised concerns about the program's lack of clear objectives or measurable outcomes. She noted that when Carson had been questioned during congressional hearings about basic HUD programs and housing policy, he had frequently appeared unfamiliar with fundamental aspects of his department's work and had given rambling, non-responsive answers that suggested he had not bothered to learn what his agency actually did. She referenced specific hearing exchanges where he had been unable to explain how major HUD programs worked or to articulate coherent policy vision for addressing housing challenges. The audience had been sitting in increasingly uncomfortable silence as Crockett methodically documented Carson's failures. The murmuring grew louder as she proceeded through item after item, showing that his HUD tenure had been characterized by ethical violations, spending failures, and policy incompetence rather than by the executive accomplishment he had implied when questioning her experience. She then delivered the observation that would definitively turn the audience against Carson. She stated that his question about her experience had presumed that his own record demonstrated the kind of competence that gave him standing to evaluate others, but that examining his actual record showed the opposite. She noted that he had taken position overseeing federal housing policy despite having no background in housing, that he had used the position to enrich and promote his family in violation of ethics rules, that he had spent taxpayer money on luxury purchases while leaving billions in housing assistance unspent, and that he had overseen worsening housing affordability while implementing publicity programs that accomplished nothing. Crockett observed that Carson's experience had proven that medical excellence did not translate to housing policy expertise, that executive titles did not guarantee competent performance, and that decades of life experience could not compensate for fundamental lack of knowledge about policy areas one had been appointed to oversee. She stated that his record demonstrated why credentials without actual competence in relevant domain produced catastrophic results, and that his standing to question anyone else's qualifications was undermined by his own documented failures. She concluded by noting that her legal experience representing working families in housing disputes, evictions, and civil rights cases had given her direct understanding of how housing policy affected real people, and that her work in Congress drafting and advocating for housing legislation reflected engagement with policy substance that Carson's HUD tenure had lacked. She stated that she would prefer relevant experience producing positive results over impressive credentials, producing scandal and failure. The town hall audience's response was immediate and audible. Applause broke out from a significant portion of attendees, while others could be heard murmuring in shock at how comprehensively Crockett had documented Carson's failures. His characteristic gentle expression had been replaced by visible discomfort as he recognized that his attempt to question her qualifications had backfired completely by inviting scrutiny of his own dismal record. Carson attempted to respond by suggesting that his HUD tenure had been more successful than critics acknowledged, and that focusing on controversies ignored substantial work his department had done. However, the response was defensive and vague, offering no specific accomplishments that could counter Crockett's detailed recitation of documented failures. The audience reaction made clear that his credibility had been destroyed, and that his attempt to position himself as experienced elder statesman, questioning inexperienced upstart, had been revealed as projection from someone whose own experience had been characterized by incompetence and scandal. The moderator moved to next question, recognizing that allowing the exchange to continue would only result in further humiliation for Carson. The remainder of the town hall proceeded with notably different dynamic, as other participants refrained from making experience-based arguments after witnessing how thoroughly such arguments could be dismantled when someone had actually examined the record being cited as credential. The story of Ben Carson questioning Jasmine Crockett's experience only to have her systematic documentation of his HUD failures turn the audience against him became viral example of why credentials alone meant nothing without examining actual performance and results. Carson had apparently believed that his impressive resume and his gentle demeanor would allow him to diminish her credibility, but her thorough knowledge of his disastrous government record had proven that his experience qualified him only as example of how not to run federal programs. The audience's hostile reaction to his attempt at condescension after she had exposed his failures demonstrated that people could recognize when someone's claimed expertise was contradicted by their actual record. If you found this examination of how documented evidence of someone's failures can destroy their attempt to claim superior experience valuable, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for continued coverage of moments when thorough preparation and knowledge of actual records triumph over credentials and assumptions about who deserves to be taken seriously.